Assemble the new hat and rotor by placing the rotor over the hat. Place one washer over each hole and apply red Loctite to the threads of each bolt. Tighten them down in a crisscross pattern and finally torque the bolts to spec. With the OEM brake components removed, install the caliper bracket mounting bolts from the inboard side. Initially install 2 shims on each bolt, line up the caliper mounting bracket and thread in the bolts. Torque the bolts to spec. Place 1 spacer and 2 shims onto the caliper mounting studs. Install the hat locator ring onto the center of the hub with the bevel facing outward. Slide your new hat rotor assembly onto the studs. Tighten down the rotor using some nuts and lug nuts to check proper alignment and complete the installation. Prepare the caliper by applying thread tape to the 90-degree brake line fitting. Thread the fitting into the caliper body so the outlet ends up facing up. Slide the caliper onto the studs. Install 1 washer and nut onto the studs and torque it down to spec. The caliper should sit centered over the rotor. If any adjustments are made, you can add or subtract the provided shims. Insert the brake pads through the top of the caliper body. The edge of the pad should align with the edge of the rotor. Once proper alignment is achieved, reassemble, but this time use Loctite. Secure the brake pads by installing the provided spacer bolt and nut. Please visit Wilwood's website for additional information and complete installation instructions. To get started with the rear kit, remove the wheel. Disconnect the brake line fitting where the hard line and rubber OEM line meet on the chassis. Quickly cap to minimize fluid loss. Remove the 2 bolts that hold on the OEM caliper and slide it off. Unscrew the OEM hat locator bolts. You may need to use the impact screwdriver to do so. Slide off the rotor assembly. The factory dust shield needs to be removed to fit the rear kit. We chose to break free the spot welds to remove the shield. Install your new caliper mounting bolts. Initially install 2 shims on each bolt. You will need to test fit the kit without Loctite initially. Line up the caliper mounting bracket and thread in the bolts. Torque the bolts to spec. Wrap the 90-degree brake line fitting with thread tape and thread it into the caliper body. The outlet should end up facing up or parallel with the caliper body. Place 1 shim washer between the caliper body and bracket. Slide the caliper over the rotor and thread the bolts into the bracket. Torque the bolts to spec. Insert the brake pads through the top of the caliper body. The edge of the pad should be even with the edge of the rotor. Add or subtract shims if adjustments are necessary. Once proper alignment is achieved, you'll need to reassemble the caliper and bracket, but this time use Loctite. Insert the pad retaining spacer, bolt, and nut. Tighten the nut to spec. You need to widen the hole in the chassis brake line bracket. By flattening out the notch in the bracket, you will only need to lightly drill out the hole to accommodate the new fitting. Connect your new fitting to the hard line and install a new clip. Thread on the flex line and tighten it snug. Route the line along the same path that the OEM line took and tighten it snug to the caliper fitting. Before you take to the streets, make sure you carefully follow the brake, bedding, and bleeding procedure included with the kit.